What news stories mattered most this week in the world of media and advertising? Today we will try to answer that question in 20 minutes or less. I'm Jack Benjamin.
And I'm Ella Sagar.
We're reporters for the Media Leader, and this week we'll be covering the latest global ad spend report from GroupM, the response to the UN Secretary General's global fossil fuel ad ban proposal, and much more. Ella, this time of year is always quite hectic between the upcoming Cannes Lions Festival of Creativity, and we've now also got major sporting events and a general election this year. How are you holding up with all that's going on, and what would you say the biggest story of the past week has been?
I think there is so much going on, so it is quite interesting to see forecasts of how much all of those events are going to influence growth going forward in advertising. So GroupM released their this year, next year mid-year update, which I know you covered. And it was quite positive. I know it's been a bit bumpy the last few years, so it's quite nice to see things upgraded instead of downgraded, and there are a few factors behind that.
Yeah. So they now expect global ad spend to grow 7.8% this year to $989.8 billion. And that's a significant uptick from, they had previously expected a 5.3% growth this year. And a lot of that is being driven by China, actually. China coming back relative to, they'd sort of stumbled post-pandemic, had lots of
more restrictions,
slower growth just in general. And it seems like a lot of, not only is advertising in the Chinese market increased significantly, especially in out of home and digital, but also Chinese companies are spending a whole lot of money in other markets advertising. So like the likes of Temu and Shein, if I pronounced that right?
Yeah,
Shein.
I think so. Yeah.
I'm not a user. Have spent a lot of money, especially on like social media companies, in digital, basically, in the US market and elsewhere. And that's driving a lot of the upward revision, for sure.
And you spoke to Kate Scott Dawkins, who was talking about, a few different elements like the US and China really driving the kind of trends in growth, but then also how the UK was faring, and that in comparison to the rest of Europe, which was quite an interesting picture. Which I thought, even though there is growth in the UK, it is, and it's slightly upgraded by I think about 0.6%.
Yeah,
but it was still kind of behind the rest of Europe.
Yeah, the UK is still lagging, but they did upwardly revise the UK market as well. They're lagging most of Europe, and I think a lot of that is frankly just attributed to the effects of Brexit. It's not the only country in the UK it's not the only country in the EU that's not doing fantastic. I think Germany is also lagging a little bit from where it had been. But it's true that, Scott Dawkins basically told me, she said, quote, "The whole industry is really driven by the US and China. They are so huge that they really impact everything we talk about." And that's because those two countries combined are currently home to 22 of the top 25 global media sellers. And there has been this sort of broader centralization, especially among the digital market, of where ad revenue is going. And we've talked about this in the past before, and Kate has mentioned this to us. And actually go listen to that episode, even though it was at the beginning of the year, and about their previous report. It's still highly relevant. It's true that from 2016 to 2023, Google, Meta, Amazon, ByteDance, and Alibaba saw a compounding annual growth rate of 23% compared to just 2.1% for literally all the other companies in the advertising space. So most of the growth is really being funneled to just a few companies.
Yes.
And I don't know how healthy that is long term, but in the short term, you have nice big numbers. People are spending more.
Yeah, and I think they also upwardly revised the forecast for the global ad industry through to 2029. So looking a bit further ahead, where that it will, and that actually, so that would go from 5.6% growth to 5.9%. And then the $1 trillion revenue kind of threshold, that's been brought forward. We're going to pass that sooner.
We're expected to pass that in 2025. That's a whole year earlier than they'd previously expected. And you're right, they did upwardly revise their expectation through 2029. They did say that this year is probably going to be a bigger spike in growth, and I don't think it's probably going to level out. But you never really know, I suppose. I mean, there's lots of growth, especially in channels like CTV, in retail media.
Yep.
So we'll see. I suppose that's why these reports get upwardly or downwardly revised. It's because it's really hard to predict a few years out. You never know how a new war like the one in Ukraine or in Gaza could impact the broader advertising and business ecosystem. So expect the unexpected. But for now, we get some updates on reports.
Some good news in a sense.
UN Secretary General António Guterres last week called for a global ban on fossil fuel advertising. He called the fossil fuel companies the quote unquote godfathers of climate chaos. And he implicated media companies they work with in the sort of climate destruction. And I was curious what you made of those comments. I reported a bit on the industry response, but I was just curious first if you had any thoughts.
I mean, that's a very unequivocal, very strong line. And it's not just saying advertising and media is complicit, it's that they're contributing to it. And for me, when I was looking at your article about industry response, and so there's a couple of different sides to it, and our editor-in-chief, Omar X, has also written a column around his views on this. Me personally, a fossil fuel ad doesn't necessarily make someone buy more fossil fuel or make someone buy Shell petrol versus BP petrol. There's a kind of inelastic demand for it. Where I do see a use for fossil fuel advertising, like fossil fuel companies advertising, is around saying, hey, we've got this, or a car automotive company say we've got this renewable energy. That is pushing that change. But there is a line where that is greenwashing when the majority of your business is based on fossil fuels. So it's a very difficult thing. And there is a question of, do ad bans actually work at all? And so then we get into different murkier waters, I think.
It's a bit of what Omar was saying in the sense of surely the better thing to do is focus on like just strong energy policy and get fossil fuel companies to stop burning so many fossil fuels. There's a broader issue around just advertising's how it's implicated in just consumption in general. More people consuming more things leads to more climate destruction. And this was brought up actually at Advertising Week Europe and I wrote an article about a session where basically people in this industry, especially younger people, are a bit disillusioned with the industry, and that's actually a problem for retaining talent. Where people, maybe out of college, they'll take any job they can get, but a few years into the job, they're like, man, I don't know how I feel about working for certain clients if they're not good for the environment. Like, I don't know if I'm doing good work. And I think that it's something this industry does need to grapple with. And I was a little bit surprised that the industry as a whole didn't respond very loudly to Guterres' comments one way or another. It's like people just kind of wanted to be silent on it. I did talk to a few stakeholders that have really strong feelings about it, like the Conscious Advertising Network. Spoke with Jake Dubbins. Talked to Hannah Mirza, who is a columnist, and she writes for us about sustainability and what we can be doing better. And of course, I think they're pushing in one direction. There are some publishers that are pushing, that have already instituted their own bans on accepting fossil fuel advertising, like The Guardian. And Imogen Fox told me that that was a hard move, but the right move, and they stand by it today, and they hope others join. So I just don't know. I would like to see personally a bit more movement on this, or at least more response. Yeah.
And maybe a bit more of a conversation. I mean, there is a debate or a kind of trend in out of home at the moment, which we've talked about previously on the podcast, with different UK councils banning fossil fuel advertising. So Edinburgh is the latest one. Sheffield was before that. And also to that list, automotive and travel companies, because they promote a high carbon lifestyle, in their words. So that if that's the direction of travel, it's nowhere near a nationwide ban. I think the question would be is how much of a hole would a global ban or a nationwide ban on fossil fuel advertising leave, how much financially for media owners and media agencies, and who would fill it? And I think from what Dubbins was saying is there are other companies that can be work done to find other companies to fill that gap. Yeah. And he kind of compared it to the tobacco companies when it was inconceivable back in the day that they would ever be unable to advertise. And they had very effective advertising. But then obviously a ban came in and alternatives were found, and the advertising industry did not collapse and the sky did not fall in. So,
right. And it's still growing as per the GroupM report. I'm glad you brought up out of home, because there was another story this week that found that global ad spend in out of home was up 16% last year, according to the World Out of Home Organization's latest global survey. So it's reached a 5.2% global share of advertising. I know they've been talking about getting above that 5% figure. How big is this?
So I think it went from a 4.7% share in 2022 to a 5.2% share. So that might sound like not very much, but it is a very significant threshold for the global out-of-home industry. Tom Goddard, who's the president of the World Out-of-Home Organization, kind of has this as a rallying cry to get above the 5% to get over what he calls like the 5%. What did he call it? Like the mentality. It's like a syndrome is what he actually called it at the previous conference I went to in Lisbon.
Of like expecting a certain amount.
Of only getting that amount when actually he would like it to be 10%. Because of the eyeballs that it gets in there, and that's the kind of pricing that it should be commanding. But there's a few different elements behind it. And you mentioned GroupM found that out of home was a big driver of growth in Asia in particular. And that is, APAC as a region registered 25% growth. So the highest growth out of any of the regions. Another element in the survey that came out was that Europe overtook North America in terms of that kind of spend as well for the first time. So there's like the digital side of it is quite an interesting one. That's driving a lot of this.
It's mostly digital.
And so it would seem like, the more digital a market is, that obviously there is more spend.
And is that because that's seen as just easier to buy? You can buy it maybe more programmatically, or you can be a bit more creative about exactly when.
Measurement as well. So Goddard kind of pointed to better and more effective measurement, more media owner consolidation, and an increased ad tech investment as like the three main drivers of this growth figure. So looking forward to 2024, it's set to record another double growth because of sports events like the Olympics and the Euros, and also half of the voting population in the world going to the polls this year. So that will be a big uptick in political advertising, and out of home is a great canvas for that. So those elements will really push that growth story.
Interesting.
We'll see if we hit 10%.
Well, I think the broader question is whether or not then next year, after in a year that doesn't have quite as many big sporting events or elections, whether that level of out of home growth maybe stays high.
Yeah. Or if it's so that it might be a tough comparable, and that actually maybe it will. Interestingly, what the World Out of Home Organization is saying is that out of home is the only traditional medium to be growing at the same time that online is growing, and other traditional media are maybe having a more difficult time of it.
Right.
But it depends how you define traditional media, right? Because you have TV, you have streaming, you have CTV, you have radio and podcasts. And so there's some elements in there which are maybe not seen as traditional. They're digitally delivered. So it's how it's being counted.
There was a big news event earlier this week, Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference. They're bringing AI to all of its platforms, and that can have downstream impacts on various different stakeholders. And so I was most interested in changes that were coming to email.
Okay. Newsletters, I think, was an area that you focused on.
Well, yes, I suppose part of it is a marketing thing. Some people just send lots and lots of marketing newsletters, but publishers also send lots of newsletters, and it's increasingly become important to their brands and that sort of brand relationship that they're trying to build, because publishers are worried about traffic getting harmed from social media, from search, especially as companies like Google put AI into all of their search platforms. So
it summarizes an article or without attributing it, so you never have to actually click on a publisher's site.
Exactly. So of course Google and also Apple own I think like 83% combined market share for email clients. So I don't know what you use for email, but I think I actually use
Gmail.
I use Gmail, and I also have Apple Mail through my iPhone. So I do use these products, and they're bringing some of the AI tools to their email products as well. And I think sounds like it would be great for consumers. You can use AI to help you draft emails, but also there are ways to use AI to also create digests of if you get inundated with emails and
which
you just want a summary.
Do, I think, to a certain extent.
As reporters, we definitely have full inboxes all the time. And so I think there's a great consumer use, there's a great business use for these types of changes, but there is a concern among publishers that this will take away another way in which they're trying to talk to audiences, because again, if people can get a summary of email newsletters that they receive, and some people sign up to loads and loads of newsletters and maybe don't spend enough time with any individual one, then they might not be clicking on links. That might not be just driving traffic back to websites, similar to the concerns around search. So I did write an article about that earlier this week.
I feel like newsletters are sort of following a trend of like blogs. How everyone had a blog, and now everyone seems to have a newsletter, and I say everyone, many people. It depends what you're getting that newsletter for. If you're just getting it for the headlines, or if you're getting it for that explanation of why that news is important or something unexpected. It depends if you're getting exactly what you are expecting or if you're looking for something unexpected, in my mind.
And some people subscribe to newsletters that are like, I love this person. Like whoever the newsletter editor is at the Times is like, oh, I want to hear their take on the news and whatever it is. Or I think magazines in particular do a very good job with this because they don't just give you the news, but they also try and dress up whatever else that they're trying to write about. So, I think a lot of people will respond, still by going and clicking into newsletters, but there are especially busy business people who receive newsletters that probably would prefer everything to be in briefs. But suddenly it sounds like every content that you consume is going to be in brief form, and you might be missing a lot.
The short form versus the long form kind of idea. And podcasting is an interesting one because it kind of bucks that trend of like people do actually want to sit for an hour and listen to people talk about one specific story, maybe not even a recent one, maybe from like 20 years ago. I just find that quite interesting as well. There's different trends.
Yeah.
It's not all snackable.
Well, yeah, there's like the backlash of younger people using dumb phones. There's a small niche cottage industry, but there is always little
smartphone-free cafes and things.
I've not been to one of those.
Yeah,
no.
there's one I saw in that's opened up in Amsterdam where it's completely tech-free. And it's like, it's like going back in time. And I'm like, just don't take your phone out when you leave the house. Like, I don't really understand.
Just talk to people face to face. Well, so I suppose it'll be something to keep an eye on, really, as these AI changes get rolled out. But it's just another thing for publishers are supposed to be concerned about. So in other news, there were a number of other additional stories this week that we won't be able to get to in quite as much detail. But Ella, what else should people be aware of?
So in outdoor news, the BFI Imax cinema in London Waterloo celebrated its 25-year anniversary this week, and Ocean Outdoor was first awarded its ad contract 18 years ago and has been the sole incumbent ever since.
Nice.
In cinema news, total UK and Ireland box office in May was £72.6 million, according to the latest figures from Comscore. This was down 29% compared with May 2023. And at the same time, Digital Cinema Media also revealed that Barbie, the Super Mario Brothers film, and Oppenheimer gained the highest 16 to 34 TVRs in 2023. In podcasting news, Bauer made its first move into news-based podcasting with The Turnout, a podcast aimed at encouraging young people to vote. And meanwhile, DMG Media agreed a deal with podcast hosting and monetization platform Adelicious for its current and upcoming titles. In TV news, ITV's self-service addressable advertising platform Planet V has hit £1 billion in bookings since its launch in October 2020. And across the pond, Paramount Global's controlling shareholder Shari Redstone has ended merger negotiations with Skydance Media after 6 months of talks. And finally, in social media news, French social app and pandemic darling BeReal has been acquired by mobile apps and games developer Voodoo for €500 million.
Thanks, Ella. That is all the time that we have. I should note, next week will be a little different as I will be heading to Cannes to report from the Croisette. Have I pronounced that correct?
Croisettes, yeah.
Getting better at my French. Alongside other members of our team, Ella, you will be holding down the fort in London. So have fun with being here.
That, yeah.
Be on the lookout for coverage from the Festival of Creativity, including a podcast, although it might be released apart from our normal Thursday morning schedule. So until next time, Ella, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks again for listening to the Media Leader podcast. If you like what you hear, guess what? You can read our stuff at our website, themedialeader.co.uk, where you can sign up to our daily newsletter in the UK of analysis, opinion and commentary about what's going on in media and advertising. You can also find us on YouTube. We are posting video interviews and clips from our live events. And don't forget to check out our LinkedIn page, which is often a very interesting way to see what people in the industry are saying about our articles and the issues we write about. Anyway, get back to work. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.